Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the Season 3 premiere of Mob Psycho 100. Great season premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we're picking up with kind of creating what it seems to be the overarching theme for the final season, and that is the future, as like people have to fill out these surveys. And I think I remember, like, not necessarily, it wasn't exactly the same, but the whole thing of like, right, what do you want to go to high school for, and then what are your plans for college and stuff like that. I remember like doing something like that in 8th grade. So they're at that point in their school where it's like, right, what do you want to do with your career? And so Mob is asking all these different people, and basically everyone kind of goes in line with who they are currently, and I think this episode also presents the whole element of not everyone sticks with what they do. I mean, just on a personal thing, like, I don't think either one of my sisters are currently in the same field that they went to school for and stuff like that. So it's just like some people, like my mom and my dad, have both stuck with their career paths, but like, you know, not everyone does. So it ends up being an interesting thing that they even cover in this episode of like, yeah, you can decide something now, even now in middle school, and you can end up changing your mind later on, because you could always just change your career path later on. I don't know if that's something that really happens in Japan, though, because I'm coming at that from like an American perspective. Like in Japan, it might be a thing of, I think, and I could be mistaken, so do correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know Japan on a societal and cultural level like that. But I feel like in Japan, it's kind of like a thing of what you do in life, you are kind of set down that path. But and once again, I could be mistaken, you know. But either way, like I said, finding out what everyone wants. Like everyone in the telepathy club, like one of the members kind of wants to go down the game route because he actually plays video games all the time. There's another one that's like, I just signed office worker because I'm probably going to change my mind and figure it out later on. Tomei is like, I actually forgot what she wanted to go to a high school that's related to like UFO stuff. So then we had like what was their face? The body improvement club, like Musashi, for example. He's like, oh yeah, like my family like owns like a farm or something like that. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to end up like taking that over after I finish high school. And one of the members, we ended up finding out, he's like ranked number 2. I was like, that's some random information. It's the one that it's got the buzzed hair. I was like, oh wow, you're number 2 in the entire school. I'm like, who's number 1 then? I was like, that I don't think, because we never found out. Maybe we will later on in the season, but I thought that was such a neat detail, because he's like, oh yeah, he loves animals, so he plans on like going down the vet route. Some other people, like Musashi kind of bust, not intentionally. He was just trying. I was about to say bust like Onigawara's balls about it, but it's like, no, he was just being genuine. Like, oh yeah, you want to go to a school about being a manga artist, and Onigawara is like, yo, shut up, don't say all that, because I guess it's embarrassing. Was it Onigawara that was the one that there was someone that we met that was 351. Not even Mob's at the bottom. Like Mob's kind of smack dab in the middle. I believe his was like 190 out of 352. But I can't remember. There was someone we saw in the episode. It might have been Onigawara. That's like 351. Because I know like Masato is like 60. We found out Tsubomi is number 4 and Ritsu's number 5. I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's kind of, and because it came out, Mob learned like, Tsubomi's going to like a really prestigious school here in Japan, and he's like, oh man, that's so cool. And she's even saying like, right, she was talking to her friends, like the school has like ties to British schools, so there is stuff like, the eligibility to like study abroad and stuff like that. So, and it's interesting because it's not like Mob has a perspective of, like in a typical story, you'd be like, oh, I'm going to try and get to the same school as you. Doesn't seem like that's even crossing Mob's mind. It's just kind of like, as he thinks about, like, anytime Risu had some accomplishment, he's like, oh my god, Risu, that's so amazing. And he's just like, oh my god, Tsubumi's so amazing. So it never crossed his mind like, oh, I'm gonna try and follow you to the same school. I mean, it didn't stop him from like last season trying to like get to the 10 in the top 10 just so he can ask her out. But he's not thinking of himself of like, oh, I'm gonna follow her to her school. Oh, she's amazing. I'm not gonna try and compete. But I'm trying to figure out what I want in my life. And I think that speaks volumes about Mob, because it is an element of, I'm not just going to follow what people tell me to do or just follow after people. I'm just going to kind of do my own thing. But it kind of goes in line. Funny enough, at the end, his teacher was like, you kind of get so, I'm kind of concerned because you continue to still be so easily influenced by people, so even though he is finding his own identity, he does tend to like kind of go with the flow of what other people suggest or bring up. But also at the same time, he does give pushback because, Regan talks about like, oh, like obviously you don't have to worry about that. You know what you're going to do for your future, and that's work here. But Mom's like, it's only a part-time job. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to work here in the future. And so he asked, Regan, it's like, what made you want to start this company? And he, was kind of like, ugh, and he tried to be like, oh, like I did everything I wanted at my old job, and I wanted to kind of take on a new challenge, which we saw insight to that. We got his personal insight. Why he started this company in the first place. We got that perspective last season, but like obviously Mob never got into that details. That was kind of for us as the audience. I love that Mazzato continues to push the whole like religion cult that's after Mob, because she's looking at the giant broccoli in the middle of the city and she's like, right, I know you had something to do with that. And she kind of does the whole shonen backstory of like, I know you had to stop some great evil, but you had a great loss. And I love the person she had die in his arms was Regan. Since they showed that, it's got to be her depiction of it, which I love that it's like, oh, Regan's the one that you lost type of situation. It's like, well, the thought process might have been that way in season 1 when he got slashed by, what was his name, Sakurai, but no, I love that. But yeah, she's like, it turns out like, I guess it's brought like, it's what's it called, like the divine tree or something like that, and it's kind of like created kind of this kind of touristy trap element to the city, and so people have kind of gathered around it and stuff like that. And once again, Mazzato's pushing because she's like, oh my God, like if they could see how amazing you are and once you kind of reveal yourself, I can be like, oh my God, like that's one of my classmates who's became this thing. And it's like, she's like, that you and all of that could be like the biggest thing that ever happened in my life. And Bob asked her like, well, what does she want to do? And she's like, oh, I'm probably going to go down the photography route, makes sense. But Mob is like, yeah, like you're amazing, Mazzato. So he's like, you're going to have much bigger things in your life. She's like, I don't think I'm going to come across anything much bigger than that. But for Mob, it's just, he doesn't see things as like the present is all there is. He kind of lives for like, oh, I'm sure like you are. He sees so many amazing people around him because so many people around him have already figured out what they want to do. And he's the one left behind. So for him, it's like, you guys are so amazing. Like, I know this stuff is not going to matter. You're going to find bigger and better stuff out there, Mazzato. Like, I don't know about that. Still, once again, she wasn't successful last season, but I'm sure she's still going to try in her own way to push that religion on Mob. So we'll see. That's taking an interesting direction. I'll go ahead and talk about it, the end of the episode, because Mob had talked about Dimple like, oh, what are you going to do for your future? And he's like, saying that to an evil spirit's kind of messed up. He's like, sorry. But then Dimple was like, wait, I actually forgot. He was like all about his like, yo, I'm going to like, take over the world and become like a god type of thing. Well, not necessarily. Well, it kind of coincides, but it's like, yeah, he was going to be a god. He remembers episode 3 of the series being like, wait, I was leading a cult and everything. And so it's like, huh. He got so swept up in all of this. That was his goal for a good chunk of season 1, and then it just started waning away more and more. And yeah, they threw it out there every once in a while about like him trying to possess Mob and him thinking about it. I mean, even I think in the episode 11 in the post-credits scene, he was like, oh, like I was trying to take advantage of him while he's a kid, but while he's getting older and older in front of my eyes, it's going to be more and more difficult. But it's like he's not seriously considered it. And then you see the end of the episode where like all those people are gathered around this tree and then he lays on top and he's like, I guess it's time. So it's like, what is Dimple going to do? Is he going to try to go back to his old ways and take advantage of this situation to become what he wants? Like, is this what he wants for the rest of his afterlife? Or is it going to be a situation of he's going to be like, no, I've stuck around long enough. I'm ready to move on. And he's going to convince Mob and them to like, send him off to the afterlife. Or maybe situations this season will lead to him to actually moving on, whether it's by choice or a situation like a battle or whatever sends him that direction. Or maybe he makes a choice to ask them to send. I don't know. Once again, I brought this up last episode, not last episode, but maybe in the season 2 finale review, I talked about like knowing that this season is kind of like, not necessarily, I guess pseudo an epilogue, but it's just like, right, it's like it's mainly about where do all these characters end up. I even love Risu, because like his dad is telling him like, yo, you got like 10 years until you graduate from college, so you'll worry about it then. But his mom's like, stop being so simplistic. And then Risu's like, oh, well, why don't you just take a job and, and based around what you're good at. He's like, you could be a magician. And then everyone's thinking like, that's too simplistic. And so Either way, the episode also revolves around two particular clients. The first client has this like thing that he bought. Poor guy paid $8,000 for it. Turns out it was only $500. He got scammed. Poor guy. But obviously Regan doing his thing, being like, no, it's not cursed. But then turns out, yes, it is. And Mob tried to warn him, and then I love that Regan tried to turn it around on Serizawa. I was like, whoa, why didn't you tell me? He's like, I made a mistake on purpose. So pulling the same BS that he pulled during the OVA that preceded this. But yeah, it's like, go ahead and get rid of that spirit. And he did. But the thing broke. And then, Regan decided to fix it on his own using pieces of rice to like fix it. It's like, oh my god. And then they said the whole thing like, oh yeah, Serizawa's brain was so blown by this, realizing just how amazing people and they're truly unbeknownst to him, like how great and truly amazing people out there in the world are. It's, Regan spewing his typical BS. But the next client ended up being kind of this shut-in guy that seems to be a hoarder, and he's kind of like talking about how life is kind of not going the way he wanted it to, and it's just kind of like he lost stuff little by little. He's saying like he's possessed by a creature, a spirit, and I loved it. All Regan's mainly focused on, it's like, oh my god, there are cockroaches everywhere, and it's disturbing him. I even love that one time when he flipped over the photo and he was like, "Ruh-ruh-ruh," and just stopped. But I love that it's like a photo, because he was saying like, yeah, I pulled out all my hair or whatever, and it was like an older photo, and Mob and Regan are like, he never had any. But we see from another younger photo, like from when his, like, with his parents. He did at one point in time, obviously. But, it's sad because he lost his girlfriend, but it seemed like she wasn't in it for like the romance. She was like, oh, you're broke, and bounced. And Regan kind of looked at the photo like, man, that kind of makes sense. But his parents died when he was like 20, and it's just, once again, it's that thing of life not working out, and it gets into that meta thing of, once again, the aspects of growing up, and also life just not working out for you, where he just feels like, yeah, like you had that, like, he's like, is this what life is going to be until I just wither and die? He's like, I've lived 50 years up until this point, but now it's like, is this all there is to me? And it's just, it's like, yeah, you hit that one road bump in life, and it just spirals out from there. Sometimes you can rein it back in, sometimes you can't, and it's a matter of, do you give up on trying to rein it back in, or try to course correct, or you just give up? And it seems like he kind of wallowed in that self-pity. And once again, this is going to be the season that's like, I mean, there's so much you could take away from Mob Psycho season 1 and 2. It feels like this season's probably going to be like, oh boy. I heard someone recently talk about like Mob Psycho. You have a very different perspective of it, watching it as like a young adult or teen versus being older watching it. And, I'm coming from this as a 32-year-old watching this series. So, but yeah, like, because this whole conversation with this guy hit home with Serizawa and Mob, because Serizawa's kind of like, right, he knows what it's like to be a shut-in and kind of shut down his entire life, and Mob knows what it's like to feel directionless, and they're kind of getting swept up in it. We never found out necessarily that he was possessed by a spirit, but it was more like his negativity, I guess, like either attracted a spirit or manifested itself, because it turns into this giant thing, and it's like, oh, telling people like to be lethargic. It's like, right, just why work? Just put it off till tomorrow, and everyone becomes lethargic, which I think it's so interesting that, I guess, despite the small amount of spiritual energy he has, because he was able to see Dimple and see spirits and stuff like that now for real. Well, no, because he always could, like, when they manifested themselves, but I guess that's the only reason why Regan, like, because when you look at it, Regan was never affected by it. Mob and Serizawa makes sense. They are psychic, so they were able to kind of block that out. Just like Dimple's powers didn't work on him in episode 3 of the show, right? So, but the fact is it didn't affect Regan. I don't know if that says a lot about Regan's fortitude, because he's so swept up in his own BS that like none of that kind of penetrates. Maybe he does have like a lot of, despite everything, maybe his greatest asset is his mental fortitude. But yeah, they end up just easily defeating the spirit, or getting rid of that thing, and trashed the guy's house by removing all the trash and stuff, but blew out the ceiling and everything. But he's got a more positive spin, being like, no, everything's gonna be okay. He's like, luckily my parents had insurance, and I was like, no, he's like, I think things are gonna work out. I think I'm gonna be heading in a better direction now. And the episode ends with him picking up a stack of, shonen weeklies, or might have said weekly shonens, and it's called Ura. I was like, of course. And yeah, he's taking them in, and I'm like, I don't know if it felt like that was kind of signifying, like, I don't know if that's necessarily saying like, oh, you're starting fresh. It feels like it's like, no, you're kind of, back into your old habits immediately, which I'm like, sadly, it's so easy to fall back into old habits and stuff. It's not the easiest thing to break. But because that was also a point too, where it's like, when you're younger, and that's something Mob's teacher was saying, like, okay, it's okay that you haven't really figured it all out, but he's like, you do want to try and think about this stuff as a teenager, because when you get later in life, it does become more difficult, So that is something, and it, those habits and stuff like that are harder to break as an adult versus when you're young, kind of nipping them in the bud. But yeah, like I said, I don't know if that was supposed to indicate that guy's going right back to his old habits. Because, like, everything he built up in his house, like all that hoarder stuff, that trash and stuff, was meant to be his barrier. I forgot what it was like trying to, like, I guess, like, it was supposed to be his barrier from, like, just life in itself kind of weighing down on him. Like, it was meant to be, like, it's a physical but also metaphorical barrier in that regard. And just to kind of protect himself, because from, like, the evil spirit he's saying as causing all this, but it's really, once again, you're kind of doing it to yourself. You are your own evil spirit type of thing. Hence why I'm like, that wasn't really an evil spirit, it's just a man. That's why I was thinking, like, does he have psychic powers or something? And they started manifesting like that. But I guess it's like the negativity, and just maybe the city just naturally has a spiritual ley line type of thing, and it just manifested that way. Like I said, could easily have just been a spirit latched onto his neck. Could they were like, oh, it's not really an evil spirit, it's just more so born from his own wrath and stuff like that. Like a kind of a wraith, kind of born from all that negativity and just drowning his own, like, apathy, I guess might be the right word. I don't know. But either way, like I said, this whole situation affected Shirazawa and Mob. And Mob says to Shirazawa, "It's like, no, you're amazing. Like, you're gonna figure stuff out. It's gonna be okay." But he's thinking about himself, and ultimately Mob comes to the conclusion, like, I'm just gonna go to high school, But his teacher also told him, like, hey, at the end of the day, after seeing what you did in the marathon, I'm not going to be too concerned, because I'm seeing the progress that you're making. He had told him last season, like, you used to seem so glum, but now I'm seeing, like, a brighter side to you. And once again, Mob is growing. He's changing. And so, he ends up ultimately talking to Regan about it. And he's like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to work here when I'm an adult. And I love that. And that's a really dope, poignant point to kind of add in the whole element of, you don't want to get, it's like, it's easy to be here, because he's like, yeah, I'm comfortable and I like it here, but it's kind of like, sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone, or I'd stay here forever and that'd be too easy. I just want to kind of go out there and, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I don't think I'll be working in the future. And Regan's like, that's perfectly fine. I was joking when I told you to do that. And he's like, I lied to you before when I was like, oh yeah, I did everything I did at work and want to move. He's like, no, I got bored with my job and I started this on the whim. He's like, actually, I was going to quit after a year and a half, but then some twists and turns. We know, and we saw again, Mob is the reason why he stuck around, but he doesn't want to tell Mob that. But it's like, yeah, like, essentially, like I said, it was something that started off on a whim, but now it's become something like, yeah, this is what I'm doing for my life. And he's telling Mob, like, don't worry, you'll find something like that, because you are who you are, And he believes in Mob, and it was a beautiful thing, and I love him leaving, and then Regan being like, wait, but there's still more left of the work day, and he's just gonna, okay. So once again, I just love the beautiful overarching message of this. And like I said, I'm sure it's going to continue as the overarching theme throughout the entire season about the future and figuring stuff out, just the part of growing and getting older. And I thought that was kind of beautiful. Once again, it hit home to me because, once again, I'm 32. I'm like, because someone else had kind of, I think it was Regan that was kind of like, maybe it was Regan. I was just kind of like, yeah, kind of flying by the seat of my pants type of thing. Of just kind of, I kind of go with, it might have even been Regan, or it was the second client that was saying the whole thing of just kind of like coasting by in life. And I'm like, I've kind of been doing that since high school. Like, I just coasted my way through high school. Not like, it just, I didn't try. And it's just that, it is that thing, that even Mob was tripping up on. Like, I haven't even made, well, for him, he's like, I haven't even made that mistake in life yet. And he's so scared because it's like, which path am I supposed to go down? It's like all these options before me, and I don't know which way to go. Once again, feeling so directionless because there's so many paths, and which one's the right path, and which path am I going to go down, and I'm going to make that mistake, and when I make that mistake, will my life spiral out? It's like, yeah, Mob was just like heavily overthinking everything in a lot of ways, and it's like, it is good to think about, but it's not like, if you can like overthink it, you can drown yourself in all that. You can get very neurotic about that, but just once again, just some interesting life stuff you can take away from the show entirely, but specifically this episode and the themes they're going for. So I'm excited to see where the next episode ultimately ends up taking us going forward with everything. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.